Hello folks, this is Mrs. Brown here. We're going to be talking in this issue of our style book about how to use punctuation in all of your sentences and writing. Now when we talk about standard American English, we're really talking about 10 different kinds of punctuation marks. There's the end marks that most of us are pretty familiar with, so I'm not even going to do a piece in the style book about periods, quotation mark, or periods, question marks, and exclamation points. But we are going to spend some time on the comma, on the semicolon, on using colons, which are the two dots, apostrophes, quotation marks, which is like a double apostrophe, sorry, my pen's not letting me write very much, parentheses, and hyphens. One of the most common punctuation marks that we have in English is the comma, and the comma is also one of the most misunderstood and often abused form of punctuation. So we're going to go through some of the basic rules for this and show you some examples, and then back in class you'll have a chance to practice this. So probably the first rule that you ever learned about commas is that commas are used to separate items in a list of 3 things or more. So tomorrow I need to bring my homework, there's one thing, my lunch, there's a second thing, and a charger to school tomorrow. Or after school I'm going to do, and there's these 3 things you're going to do. I'm going to watch my video, watch Pretty Little Liars, and text my friends. So anytime that you have 3 or more items, you use the comma to separate them. Now, if you're a language nerd like me, there's a lot of debate out there about things called the Oxford comma. The Oxford comma, also referred to as the serial comma, is when you add the 3rd comma in a series before the and. And it's, you use this usually when you need to add clarity to a sentence, when otherwise you'd end up creating something like an appositive phrase that would change the meaning. So instead of having a list of 3 things, it changes it to something else. So for example, here you have Tim Tebow. So he won the game, and he's thanking these people. He thanked God, his parents, and his coach. But in the second part, if you don't use the Oxford comma, he thanked God and he thanked his parents, God and the coach, and that makes it look like God and the coach are indeed his parents. So in that case, the Oxford comma is really useful because it does help create more clarity over exactly who it is that Tim Tebow was thanking down on his knees. Commas are also used in a sentence to separate independent clauses when they're joined by one of these conjunctions, and, or, for, nor, so, but, or yet. So an independent clause, again, is 2 complete thoughts that you're putting together into a single sentence. So I want to get tacos from the food truck, but I forgot my money today. So those are really 2 different complete thoughts. I want to get tacos from the food truck could stand alone as its own sentence, and I forgot my money could stand alone as its own sentence. So when you're using them and adding a conjunction between them, that's when you use the comma. I want to get tacos from the food truck, comma, but I forgot my money. Now you also use a comma when you have a dependent clause that you're trying to attach to an independent clause. So if you have something like, my mom will bring me lunch, that's a complete thought. And if you're adding the dependent clause sometime tomorrow, you need to have the comma here to separate them. Or in the second example, if you study, you will pass the test. The comma here is separating this dependent clause, if you study. That's not a sentence by itself. There's no what would happen if you study. It doesn't finish the thought. But this dependent, or this independent clause, you will pass the test, it can stand by itself. So when you're adding this independent clause to the dependent clause, that's when you have the comma to help keep them separate and clear. You use a comma when you're trying to separate in a positive phrase from the rest of the sentence. And a positive phrase is something that adds extra information about the subject, that refers back to the name of the subject. So if you take the sentence, Miss Brown, made us pancakes. This extra little bit in the middle, my favorite English teacher, is a separate phrase that helps describe Miss Brown. And so you would separate that by commas in the sentence. So Miss Brown, comma, my favorite English teacher, comma, made us pancakes. You could run the whole sentence, Miss Brown made us pancakes, without having that extra information. That's what's known as a positive phrase, and use commas to separate that. Or in the second example, my favorite English teacher, comma, Mr. Finley, comma, is also a great drama teacher. In this case, again, Mr. Finley becomes a positive phrase to describe who your favorite English teacher is, and the comma helps to separate that information from the rest of the sentence. Commas are also used very specifically when you're writing dialogue or you're trying to separate a quotation from the sentence. So in the first example, sit down, my father asked, you'll notice the comma here says that your whole sentence is not done yet. The whole sentence is this, sit down, my father asked, but the part of the sentence that your father said, sit down, is separated by using the comma. It shows that that's different from my father asked. Or in the next example, he said, comma, I'm going to raise your allowance. So the quotation itself that was said is separated by a comma from the person who said it. Commas can also be used when you have interjections that you don't need an exclamation point for, but it's just a way to separate that thought, that extra bit of emotional reaction or comment from the rest of the sentence. So the first example here, I still don't understand commas. The wait is just a little bit of extra information that's added on. So it's wait, comma, I still don't understand commas. Or the next, however, comma, I'll ask questions in class, and fortunately, my group can help. So in those cases, the interjections are set off from the rest of the sentence by a comma. You're probably pretty familiar with these, but you use commas when you're talking about addresses. Specifically, you separate the city from the country or the country and the state together. So we're camping in Boone, comma, North Carolina, or my shoes came from Paris, comma, France. So the comma goes between the name of the city and the state or between the name of the city and the country. The other place that you're probably pretty familiar with writing commas is in dates. Commas are used in any kind of date to separate the day of the week from the day of the month from the year. So you would write about your birthday as being, my birthday is Wednesday, comma, that's the day separated from the month. November 15th, there's the date separated from the year 1996. So the commas go in between the day of the week or the day of the month or the year that you're trying to show separate.